So usually how I like to start these conversations, man, is just about an individual's journey and the roadmap to get to where they are now. And usually when I talk to people, they're sort of like in their prime, right? You're sort of like, people are like LeBron in 2000 in 2000, 10, let's say, right? Like it just peak of their powers. They've converged all their skill sets and they're finally at a place where they could sort of give back, right? And give back knowledge wise is a big deal to me. And I appreciate everybody who takes the time to do so, so let's start as far back as you want. We kind of fumbled around between that 14 and 18 age when you door-to-door sales. So let's start there and then we'll get more to the journey.
From the time that you're like, 0 up to like 14, 13, you're just kind of figuring it out,
Mm-hmm.
You're not really self-aware just yet. And I think it really kicked in for me at a young age that I just fell in love with communication.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly out of the necessity to be able to speak, because English is my second language. I was born in Cuba. And so
Wow.
when I came to the US, I spoke no English. And
Wow.
so the necessity to say, I'm hungry or I need to go to the bathroom, like the most basic things, it wasn't part of my vocabulary. So I struggled with that. And I think that's when I fell in love with communication. I thought, man, if I can give something voice, then it'll be considered.
Right.
Now, depending on how persuasive I am will depend on whether it happens or not. So I think it was like 2004 or so. I got into door-to-door sales. I was a kid, 14 years old, knocking on doors, selling newspaper. And there I learned one of the best skill sets I could ever learn. Really, it's sales. And I think when you go to design school, for example, I'm a designer by trade. When you go to design school, I think design kind of loses its business sensitivity because you're partnered with art, right? With art programs and sculpture. And so having that background in sales really did help, because I spent like 5 years knocking on doors, really.
Wow. Literally.
So, yeah, 5 years. And then in the midst of all that, I was also doing speech and debate in my high school.
Okay.
And this is where I was really passionate about this, right? Trying to be able to communicate complex ideas or present an argument that's holistic, that makes sense, and people can like nod their head and understand with evidence, right?
Right.
The key word there is evidence. But anyway, what ended up happening is I spent quite a bit of time, knocking on doors, doing the speech and debate thing. And then at some point, and this was my first taste, right? Because as a founder or as anyone who's interested in a certain topic, you begin to recognize patterns. And this was the first time that I recognized the pattern. I thought, if you love something and you just do it out of the love for it, then eventually you'll get good at it, and then turns into great, and so on and so forth. So as a result of doing door-to-door sales and speech and debate, I ended up getting a full ride scholarship to the #1 speech and debate team in the nation. Now, Think about this, right?
Unbelievable.
Think about this. An 8-year-old kid comes from Cuba, no English at all, and then I'm like, okay, this is great.
This is America, right? This is American dream, right? Like a little bit, I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And to me, that was the first time I was able to recognize the pattern that if you love something and you're able to pour yourself into it and really make the sacrifices necessary, there's literally no limit. I mean, if I could do that, then anyone can do anything,
right.
know? So in college, this is where I started to really reach that moment where I was self-actualizing and really making sense of who I wanted to create for myself, my persona. I think it was Dame Dash. I listened to an interview with Dame Dash. She says, you have to art detect your life. And he said architect, but he pronounced it incorrectly to art detect. And I thought to myself, well, art creates questions. And so if you're art detecting, what you're doing is you're answering the questions for yourself before you make it happen. And so that's basically what I started doing. It was art detecting the questions that I needed to answer to get to that next stage. While I was doing speech and debate, I realized, well, if I can tell someone something, they'll listen. But if I can show them, then they'll believe me. And so that's when I thought, maybe I should look into graphic design or some sort of design, right?
Right.
And so I married the two together, and I ended up graduating with a BFA in design. And after that, I was like, okay, I'm ready. This is go time. It's time to shine. And then I got smacked in the face by reality. I got smacked in the face. There's this misconception: you graduate from college, and the whole sense of like, oh, first generation, you go to college and you graduate, and then
Everything
you get
just
into
falls
the
into
real
place
world.
and it happens for you. Yeah, yeah.
That's not the
No,
case. That's not the case at all. So I'm unpacking some of these pain points too, because I don't want to sit here and only talk about the successes. There's a lot of pain and doubt went into this process. And so one of the biggest things I had to come to terms with is maybe the market isn't wrong. Maybe I'm just not good enough yet.
Right.
And so I started reading books like, Carol Dweck, Mindset. She talks a lot about fixed versus growth mindset. And this is where I started thinking, well, if I can employ the idea of you're not good enough yet, then you'll for sure be moving in the next direction and not kind of be so stuck in this defeated mindset. And so there's been a couple times in my life where that's happened, where I thought that something would play out a certain way and it just didn't. And those are the times that, I had to take a step back and really accept it and take a real catalog of what's happening instead of just being upset that it's, not working out. So that was one of the times. 2013, I graduated from school and then moved, out to California in the Bay Area. And I heard about this thing called coding and how you can create applications, and there's coding boot camps that kind of help you speed up the process. And I was like, oh, well, shoot, if I can create a business card and give it to someone, that's a 1-to-1 transaction. If I can make a poster, that's like 1-to-100 transaction because of the people that walk by it. But I heard that if you create an app or if you create a website that lives in a digital form, you can touch the lives of millions and billions of people. That's when things got interesting. So I started to teach myself how to code. I spent about 3 months and then spent just about every dollar I could afford on a coding boot camp at General Assembly.
Wow. What language was it?
It was all front end development with some back end, but mostly front end. So I wouldn't call it programming. It's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Those are the foundations of everything else, right? That's like learning English and technology, really. HTML, CSS is just foundations of, and JavaScript. I mean, it's the foundations of basically like everything that's built.
Yeah, that's a fair point. You're right. And it did give me that foundational layer to at least communicate to an engineer what needed to be done.
Right.
I think, your recent interview with Webflow Joe, he talks a lot about you don't always need to be the person that's doing the hand coding yourself into production, but at least understand JavaScript, understand what is possible so that way you can communicate it. And, if you think about it, back in the day, like way before you even had the internet, when it was like basic scripture written in stone, the people that could read and write were the ones that can communicate truth.
Yep.
And so, that can also be, you can flip that coin and say you can communicate, lies, but that power to be able to control it. I have a pretty good moral compass. I wanted to create good in the world. I wanted to create software that made an impact. So I wanted to understand it enough to communicate it and perhaps even do it myself, right?
When you got out of the General Assembly boot camp, what was sort of the next steps there? Did any opportunities come from that after that came, or were you still sort of, now you just have a much more plush resume and you're still trying to go hustle and get jobs?
Yeah, good question. So when I got out of General Assembly, I was still working at a pretty entry level design job, like graphic design, because that's what I studied, graphic design, and packaging design, like boxes and things of that nature for products. And I consider myself a recovering graphic designer to this day because I still love the art of graphic design. That part will probably never leave me, but I have vivid memories of, Jim Rohn talks about this. He says, don't be an overworked underachiever. And those are the memories that I was having. It was, I just wasn't really happy. So General Assembly, what it did was it gave me the power to, one, level up, but then I ended up getting some offers to go to a startup. And this is when I joined my first startup, HackerRank. Shout out to HackerRank. Such a great company, amazing people. In fact, I met so many great people at HackerRank that I ended up starting 3 businesses with people at HackerRank. And I still keep in contact with Day.
I love it. No, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And that's one thing about, I think the community of whether it's design and specifically in development and sort of entrepreneurship, it really is sort of just like a community of givers, right? Whether it's time, whether it's, just knowledge, whether it's sometimes it could be actual work. I've just it's such a refreshing environment and ecosystem to be in because everybody just wants to solve problems, man. Whether it's in the physical world or the digital world, I think problem solving brings people together in a weird way, right? It's sort of this competition that breeds it breeds togetherness, right? It sort of just breeds outcomes that are much different than other competitive scenarios. So that's great, man. That's so awesome to hear that those bonds, when you build a business with somebody, you never forget, right? That's a bond that's for life. That's like living with somebody for a year. You never forget your roommates.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And the funny thing about it is the people that you choose to start businesses with, whether it falls off and you don't end up succeeding or not,
Yeah,
I think building a business with someone, like you said, it's yes, we can call it intimate. It's an intimate experience
for sure.
because you're working towards creating something that doesn't exist yet, which is crazy if you think about it. You have to align mentally and then like
Mhm.
somehow through space and time do enough effort to make this thing work. Like what? It's crazy.
When you started sort of getting into the startup scene, right, which is hectic in its own right, right? And so, what was your position right there, and like, what were you working on day to day? What were the tools you were using? We'll call it back then, even though it's not that
Yeah.
old, right? But like, what were some of the day to day stuff? What were you working on, and what were the tools you were using?
Yeah, for sure. It wasn't that long ago. You're right. So when I worked at startups, so I worked at three startups that did not belong to me.
Hmm.
These were as early employee. Two of the startups were like I was the fifth employee, and the other one I think I was like 15 or 16. So
Hmm.
very young.
Yeah.
Hacker Rank was a little bit larger, but the capacity that I contributed to these companies was mostly on the UI UX side. So I was
Hmm.
a product designer, digital product designer. So that entails going back to the previous statement around problem solving and speech and debate. A lot of product design is constructing arguments. You're defending a design solution with meaning because that's the biggest difference with an artist and a designer. A designer is creating solutions to a known problem that's
Hmm.
validated through data, And I used to say this early on in interviews that I would do. It's design in the absence of data is not design; it's art. And so
Hmm.
that's really what that's really what the roles were. It was really doing research, doing very agile way, creating several solutions to solve feature or even people problems, right?
Hmm.
It starts with the people problem and then, I would say UX UI design is still something that is kind of misunderstood. I think there's a lot of definitions, but people are still talking about what is the difference between UI and UX for some
Hmm.
reason.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so the biggest thing that I took from those roles is one, be able to think about the UX, the experience, because when you work on projects that don't focus on the UX, you tend to hear requirements. I need 3 screens. I need a homepage. Or I need the app to do this.
Hmm.
Instead, we shouldn't even think about that yet. We need to create systems, right? The
Great point.
systems that need to yeah, I mean it's an interesting point to make because when you go into these startups, it's preached that they do practice that, but not all startups practice that, you know. Not all I mean, there's a lot to say about startups that do practice design thinking and, proper UX, but from my experience, a lot of startups just want to crank out a bunch of, it's this notion that you have to move fast and break things. That whole Facebook thing
Yeah.
only works if you're not trying to build something of value.
Yep.
Because if you want to make something of value, you have to almost take your time with it a little bit. You can't just spit out a bunch of random stuff out there.
What were some of the, speaking of processes and applications and tools that we use, what were some of those that you were using? Was it just Adobe products? Was it Sketch? I don't think probably Adobe XD probably didn't exist yet, maybe in its form that it is now. But what were some of the tools that you were using for UI UX and for front end stuff?
Yeah, so As far as UI UX, I was 100% on board with Sketch. This was when Sketch was at its
Yeah.
prime,
Hmm.
widely adopted by everyone. Before Figma made a
Yeah.
dent, before Adobe XD, I would also code everything from scratch since I took that boot camp at General Assembly.
Wow.
But mostly I would do Twitter Bootstrap as a starting foundation,
Yep.
and then build on top of that, leverage other libraries.
Yep.
jQuery was,
Yep.
another super popular one. But yes, as far as prototyping, I was very heavy into Principle app. I still use it to this day for micro animations.
Hmm. Hmm. Speaking of sort of processes, and now we're kind of in a world of automation a little bit, right? And sort of all these processes being built by other platforms, and Zapier has sort of taken the world by storm a little bit, and connecting all these products together to kind of create, automated workflows that sort of never existed before, and now it could make your life so much easier. And sometimes, in some cases, it might make it more difficult because you still have to set up all the plugins and all the automations and things like that. But what are some of
Yeah.
the new stuff that you've taken a liking to, right? And really, I mean, obviously, we want to talk about Webflow because I think we both agree that it's one of the best platforms that have come out in probably the last decade or so. It could really change a lot of the game for web developers. But what are some of the other tools out there that you've really taken a liking to? And do you put anything up there with Webflow that you like that maybe might do some other things?
Yeah, so I first got a breath of integrations and automations in like 2017 when I first joined Google. I met this guy, he's brilliant, and we would have lunch often. He was an engineer, basically an AI
Hmm.
engineer,
Hmm. Hmm.
and he would walk me through all of these automations that he's built for himself. And some of these are, I can't really talk about them as I'm under NDA, but some
Sure.
of these are just like crazy automations. And I'm like, man, if only this was accessible to the average, consumer, but
Right.
more so in a way that's not so complex. Before the command line, or after the command line, and we created like a graphical user interface, like people
Hmm.
had to code into the command line to access things. So I wanted that, but for the average person.
Hmm.
And that leads to my next point, which is you find, tools that come out like voice flow, for example, where
Mm, yeah.
it's like web flow for, voice control, like making Alexa apps and things of
Yep.
that nature. You have Zapier that ties together the glue, Parabola that ties, the internet together, like glue. Basically, it's very similar to Zapier. And these tools tap into so many different apps. They tap into apps that exist on your desktop. They
Hmm.
attach to apps that exist on the browser. And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
It's
it's
crazy.
super fascinating. I adopt a lot of these, or at least I give them a chance, and I
Yeah.
stick with what I love. Right now, my tech stack in terms of automations is very very much on Zapier.
Hmm.
And it's true what they say. Zapier does make you happier.
Could you share what are some of your zaps right now that you love and can't live without?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm giving away my cookies at this point, but I want to give away as much as I can, and I think these secrets shouldn't be kept. And actually, I think a lot of people are already doing this,
Yeah.
and if they're not, they should. When I first started the agency about a year ago, when I went full time, I was focused on doing the best work possible.
Hmm.
And then I
Hmm.
realized that doing the best work possible is only going to get you so far. You have to create automations or even systems in place
Yeah.
that take you away from the day to day, right? One example of this is I realized that I was spending a lot of time responding to folks saying, "Hey, I'm free at this time. I'm free at that time. When are you free?" And I actually did the math, and I was spending about 25 to 30 hours a month, okay, doing this back and forth. And then I employed Calendly. That solved that.
Yep.
What what's the next thing that I can automate is what I ask myself, or at least smooth out the edges, if you follow my drift.
Sure.
And that's when Zapier came into place, and I realized, well, when people book me and they want to collaborate with me or to even chat with me about solving their problems from a business perspective, there has to be some type of funnel that they go through, at least some type of system that I can manage. And so
Yep.
the system that I have now is whenever someone goes on my site and then submits the portfolio form, or submits the form,
Yep.
Zapier takes that information, automatically creates a card in Trello. So
Mm-hmm.
I built out my own CRM in Trello. It's backlog, pipeline, in progress,
Yep.
outsourced, in
Mm-hmm.
review, and then completed. And so their information automatically gets submit there, and then through very basic Zapier checkboxes that they have, I create a checklist that tells me what stage of the process the lead is in. So if I've reached out, if I've sent a proposal, and if it's ready for work. In addition to that, the lead will automatically get an email. And since in my Webflow form, I have a name, right? It basically
Yep.
takes the first name and then makes that email, I guess, more personal by taking, instead of saying, hey, thanks for reaching out,
Yep.
it says, hey, Grant, thanks for
Yep.
reaching out, with some basic info about myself. And then if they add a phone number, I've also used Twilio to text them like a personal message. So then it's there's quite a bit of automation involved.
Wow. I love that. I want to talk about Webflow a little bit because
Yeah, let's do it.
it's, I guess in 2017, it's come obviously a long way, since then,
Yeah.
2017, 2018. Was it easy for you to transition everything to Webflow, especially when speaking with clients or clients that were, might be on other platforms, right? They're like, well, look, I don't want to change, right? Or were you adamant about maybe moving them over, or adamant about saying, hey, this is the platform we're going to use to build your product? Do clients care what stuff is built on, or they're just like, whatever you want, that's going to be the best sort of outcome?
Man, that's such a good question. Well, I'll tell you this. I'll lead with this. I've never had any client say, I'll buy 10 more because you're using Webflow. I've also never had a client say, I'll buy 10 more because you're using Shopify,
Right.
or any tool. And so the point that I'm trying to make here is that I'm pretty much tool agnostic. I
Mm-hmm.
don't care about the tool so much. With that being said, though, because I come from a UX background, I have to say that Webflow is the first no code platform that got UX correct.
I totally think that's the difference. That's why it makes it so great, honestly.
And you can't knock them for that. Like, they've exceeded expectations times 1 million,
Mm-hmm.
because now it's no longer a question of, hey, can we do it, or hey, can we use a template, right, that has the layout for us to put our content in. Now the advantage that businesses have, or even people like you and I have, is that you can come up with an idea and sit down, put it down on paper, put it down on a design, and then build it out in Webflow one to one. I'm not talking about like, oh, we shouldn't do it this way because it's not possible. You can literally build just about 90% of what you would through 95%, maybe what you would through custom code. And if you
Yep.
can't do it in Webflow, just write the custom code part.
Yep.
Crazy. It's crazy. And the fact is, to answer your question, is the fact is no one talks to me about WordPress, or they come, maybe they have the assumption that this guy only works with Webflow, but I have not had one person ask me that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You mentioned but see, that kind of goes back to the point made earlier when Joe spoke about it previous episode, and you spoke about it previous episode. I'm kind of shocked because I think as either a business owner or a project manager, I think you should know what your stack is. Right? Like that, it's kind of shocking that people, not that they don't care or don't know, but like, to me, that would help your business so much more if you understood the tech stack that your company is using, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think that is almost, I mean, that's like basic things, I think, for
Yeah.
entrepreneurs coming up, right? It might be different because,
Yeah.
look, if you're, above a certain age or something, it's just ingrained in your mind. It's just never been something for you. But like, if you're young in your 20s or something like that, I could not fathom like a 25-year-old, entrepreneur not knowing, what their tech stack, like what their email marketing service they're using, right? Or what web platform they're using to run their company. It just seems just crazy to think that.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, you're right. I think I guess I can only speak for myself here.
Yeah.
The one reason why I stuck with Webflow is I guess over the years I've developed a bit of a palette for what rings in my ear. And if something rings in my ear and I test it out and then it rings louder, I don't question it. You know, I'm not the type of person that will question blessings. Okay. Once I realize it, I'm all in.
You you
Yeah.
had mentioned Shopify.
Yeah.
E-commerce is obviously it's obviously on top of mind right now for everybody. And Webflow is sort of
Yeah.
dabbling into it, right? I think they're in obviously the early stages of their e-commerce engine. Do you see Webflow being a significant possibly competitor to Shopify going forward, or do you think it'll be a very small part of their platform and their business just because Shopify is just so sort of ahead of them, and they're sort of the Netflix of of e-commerce platforms. But do you see Webflow like really making a play into making their e-commerce universally accepted?
I do
Okay.
think so. I do have friends that exclusively use Shopify. I've used
Yeah.
Shopify in the past, and I give credit where credit is due. Webflow is new to the e-commerce space as far as like the feature sets that they provide. Are they robust? Absolutely. Can you build a store? Absolutely. But Shopify is, it's made its mark, and it has certain
Mm-hmm.
functionality, backboard or back-end dashboards, and the functionality that they
App
offer
Store.
that's
App
just,
Store is huge.
yeah, you can't even, like you said, it's like the Netflix, right?
When you look at tools now, how much has like your tech stack changed, right? From let's say even 5 years ago, right? Like has because I don't think Trello's even 5 years old yet, right? Or maybe very close. But what has your tech stack changed over the last, let's say, like 5 years of sort of like Zapier didn't exist really 5 years ago, right? So as these new stuff come out, is it hard for you to like switch? And because to me it's very difficult to like switch to a new product. Like to me Webflow is really hard to be like totally rip the band-aid off and say like this is just what I'm gonna do, like there's just nothing else, right? Like it's very hard to like change it. Like I've been wanting to get off MailChimp for so long, but it's like
Yeah,
so aggravating. It's like that's a big lift, man. Like that's a big deal, and sometimes it's just exhausting. It's like, you know what, it's good enough. Like it does what it does, and that's it. Like all these other shiny
yeah.
email marketing services, or it is what it is. But I guess I'm just stick here because it's too overwhelming to change platforms. Do you ever come across that, like just running your company? It's like, man, I want to change, but it's just right now it's too much of a headache to do so.
Yeah, those questions definitely come to mind, especially now that I'm responsible for kind of my own well-being, and I have to fend for myself since I started up this business. It really comes down to opportunity cost. What is the cost of doing it wrong versus what is the cost of going to figure out a better solution? And to me, like I've tried a little bit of Editor X, for example. It's the new Wix. It's comparable to Webflow, and it has a lot of potential. And so that's really what I focus on. To answer your question is what's the potentiality of this improving what I'm doing? Because another thing is, I never want to be that person that is just stuck to what I'm doing because that's how it's always been. Although, if something is working, I also don't want to break it. So there's this like weird balance between testing, iterating on different tools, practicing, like for example, bubble.is. I've
Mm-hmm.
been playing with that, bubble.is, for like building applications.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a cockpit, right?
Yeah.
And I've learned that, yeah, I can fall in love with this tool, but the opportunity cost of spending that time might not be there because I have other responsibilities, right?
Yeah.
But I will say this though, man, going back to the other point I made, which is I'm not one to question blessings, is I'll tap into certain things, and if it vibes well with me, again, I think I developed a palate for this. If it vibes well and I see opportunity, then I'll go all in, and so far it's been working out. Like I recently into, are you familiar with Adalo? I may have told you this in the
Yeah,
past.
yeah.
Adalo.
Building apps. It's like almost like a quick app sort of builder, correct?
Yeah, they mostly do native applications really
Mm-hmm.
well, like iOS and Android. But I found out about them because I met Ron, one of the founders, at the No Code conference. He's a venture capital guy in LA. He owns this company called Rainfall. Rainfall invested in Webflow. And so, you almost have to be prudent enough. Yeah, you almost have to be prudent enough to be like, okay, these people of power are in communication with one another and they have big ideas. Let's figure out what has legs here, and what doesn't. And so I found out that Rainfall invested flow is early on. And so I was like, oh man, like there has to be some symmetry and logic here. They wouldn't invest in Webflow and then not in Adalo if they didn't see similarities and if
Right.
Webflow's picking up. So these are the types of, like, I just have internal dialogue and then I question things, I test it out. And now I guess I've been using Adalo for a while now. It hasn't been a year yet, but I ended up becoming an Adalo expert. And now I get leads from Adalo the same way that I get leads from being a Webflow expert. And so these types of things happen organically out of just the love of learning and wanting to build. But yeah, to answer your point, I think the tools continue to evolve. And as you continue to evolve and level up, it's inevitable to be like, oh, what can I do if I learn how to build native apps,
Right.
and then just follow that train of thought, see how far it takes you. Yeah.
we were talking before we started recording a little bit about was it your cousin or your nephew that came by and
My brother.
yeah, oh, your brother.
My
Yeah,
brother.
yeah. So your brother, you're kind of teaching him the ropes a little bit, but like for you said he was like 19, and for maybe individuals graduating high school, right, and sort of colleges, maybe unattainable for people or just not as appealing, right, for some people, and many people, I think. What direction would you tell them to go? Do you talk to him about coding boot camps? I mean, your time at General Assembly seemed to be positive, and now there's hundreds of boot camps out there that he could go to. Is the path maybe different for him, you would say, to go down, rather than maybe a traditional sort of route? I mean, if you do if you do like 2 years of boot camps, right? Maybe you do 4 boot camps in 2 years, and then you're a full stack sort of developer, designer, and maybe you even take a sales boot camp that are coming out now, which seem to be a really, really interesting sector as well. In 2 years, man, you can come out a pretty talented dude, or a sister. Like, you could be a really talented human in the workforce, and you could start your business at 20, right? 21. Would you recommend that path for him? I mean, we could take your brother for an example, but what's the conversations like with him about stuff like this?
Yeah, that's a unique perspective because the traditional school model has always been, or at least growing up, maybe this is just me because I'm an immigrant, I was told, you go to college, you go get a job.
Right.
That's the path to success. And if you're an immigrant, you don't go to college, your parents will look at you like, wow, what are you doing? That's kind of that's the way that I was raised, at least. And there's a lot of truth to be said about not having to go that traditional route if you, one, have a passion, an obsession almost towards something already. If, like, there's a lot that you can learn in college that you wouldn't be able to learn if you were out on your own,
Sure.
like
Yeah.
general communication skills, like these types of things, and how to interpersonal communication skills you learn by being in class, doing work projects, that type of thing. And you also build a network, which is really nice. But if you want to, you can definitely fast track that now. And I have this discussion with Franklin, my brother. I tell him, hey Frankie, here's what I know to be true. You don't have to bump into all these roads. And this is from a recent experience, firsthand experience of someone who, one, went to college for 5 years. I got a BFA, so it's like a year later, longer. And then I also did a boot camp. So I've experienced both of them. And I tell them, hey, you can literally, I told them this, exactly what you said, you can literally spend 1 year to 2 years and become a beast.
Beast.
Because it doesn't matter where you get the information, just get the information.
And I think the one thing that's interesting too is that it doesn't really matter where you start from, right? Because it might be different if you're going to be like a portfolio manager in finance, right? Probably need longer time period, right? It's like you need that that 4 years or even maybe 6 years, or like a doctor or a scientist.
Exactly.
You know, these roads are different. Those journeys are going to be different. But if you say you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to own a media company, or you want to own an agency, there is specific things that you can knock out, right? Like immediately you can write a 12-month roadmap where you
Yeah.
take, 2 boot camps or something like that. And within a year, I mean, you could be building significant products, right?
Yeah.
Depending on what boot camps you take. I mean, you can be building, significant things that people can use, or, you can build landing pages to get prospective leads, or like, there's a real way. I guess that the starting point is not as crazy as like being a doctor, right?
Yeah.
That's really, it's a difficult process, right? And most people just can't do it, or like even a lawyer. So I think the barrier to entry now is so much more attainable for people, right? Especially like you said, like your background, like Frankie, he's starting ahead of you, right? Like he has an extra step that you didn't, that you had to go through that he didn't, so he's already ahead of you, really, if he starts now trying to build his skill sets. I just think it's such an amazing time to build your skill set stack. And if you can do that right, and the possibilities are endless, and it's just such an amazing time to be able to do it.
Well, I'll tell you this, because I agree with you 110%. I'll tell you this. Part of the reason why I went to college is because, well, when I got a scholarship, so who wouldn't take
Of
that? It's
course.
free
Yeah.
education.
Yeah.
But if I had not had that scholarship, I was evaluating, what is the meaning behind it? Because back in the day, it was social capital. Your son graduated from Harvard. Your son graduated from, Academy of Art, whatever it may be. That comes with a lot of like, it's like you reach a certain tier, right? So entrepreneurship was not put on a pedestal. And Gary Vaynerchuk talks about this all the time. And now everyone's trying to be an entrepreneur. There's definitely a balance though, because I don't want to overhype up the entrepreneur side, because it is a lot of effort and it comes with a lot of failure. Not everyone is made out for that.
Yeah.
But the one thing that is true is skill stacking. If you stack complementary skills and you reach a certain level where you become a subject matter expert in a couple of different areas that are complementary to each other, that someone who did not go through the growing pains of learning these three different skills, like for example, for me, I can speak for myself. It was communication is one superpower, UX design, visual design, and then now Webflow development. So I can communicate ideas, work through problems from a UX, design the visual design, and then engineer it. That's a valuable set of complementary skills. If someone else can do that for, say, legal, to go to college, but then also learn other legal practices, right? Not just immigration law, but also like whatever it may be. You then become one more employable, and also, I think mentally you just feel better about yourself, because the more you know, maybe this is just my perspective, the more I learn, the more comfortable I become in my own mind. And I realized that once I reached a certain point, I started to walk a little bit different, because I could go sit with the marketing team and have a holistic conversation.
100%.
I can sit with engineering. I can sit with the CEO. And the biggest thing is to developing this dynamic range, I would say, is that you become a more empathetic person as a result, which people love, by the way. People like to feel like they're heard and empathized. So you become an empathetic person as a result of not having your own preconceived notion about what it is that the other person is going through. You end up actually understanding what it is that they're going through, because you've put yourself in their shoes. You know what I mean?
I think it's a great point. If you become a chameleon, right, you can live in these different rooms and have and understand, right, and have a voice in all these different rooms. That's such a powerful skill set to have. You can never not have enough of those, right? I mean, you could live in all these different rooms, and I think you almost have to, because all the tools we spoke about, right, all the different skill sets, they're always going to be changing too, right? Not changing, but going up a level, right? They're going to be maturing in the products that come out and the new stuff. I mean, we see it with, artificial intelligence now is sort of taking this leap, and sort of big data and analytics are becoming sort of this foundational thing that live on top of companies, right, that run companies. And it's those skill sets are now going to be in demand just as much as these other ones. So if you could stack your understanding of what AI is, or even just how blockchain works, right, and have still the UX and the design skills, and maybe some sales skills and communication skills, like you're just a 5 tool player, right? And it's just the greatest part about it is that the assets and outlets to learn these things are available to us all, right? I mean, obviously, if you live in a village in Rwanda, right, and you don't have great internet, right, that's a different thing and different topic. But for most of us in North America and a lot of parts of Europe and a lot of parts around the world, excuses are not a lot out there, man. Not a lot of excuses anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I'd like to piggyback one last thing before I forget. I want to make sure that this is clear. I'm in no way advocating that, someone should go and build a ton of skill sets, right? And then that's going to make you successful. That
Right.
worked for me, but
Yeah.
it worked for me because I'm curious. Like if you think about like about the book Mastery by Robert Greene, he talks about Charles Darwin and Da Vinci. Da Vinci was a maniac. He knew just about everything about anything, or the other way around, anything about everything. And then you have, Darwin. Darwin, he specialized in like coral. Like he just studied coral for like years, maybe 10 years, 14 years or something like that. I would lose my mind. But look at the impact that both of those figures made in
Right.
society.
Right.
So there's a lot to be said about that dichotomy between the two. I think you can be happy and successful doing both, whether it's like mastery and specializing, or
Right.
mastery and spreading yourself out. It's a unique conversation to have. I just lean more towards like the learn as much as I can because I have an allergy to idle time.
And it just opens opportunity, man. It gives you just a better chance at success, whatever that means to you as an individual. Having skill
Right.
sets, it just adds to the opportunities that you could have in life. But I appreciate you taking the time, man, so much. I know you're busy and you have a lot on your plate, and it's always, again, I always really appreciate people taking time out of their life to do this, man, and give people knowledge and understanding about a subject matter, because it's important, man. It's something we can do. Our time and knowledge to give back is sometimes it could be more beneficial than money. So I appreciate you taking the time, man, and best of luck the rest of this year, and best of luck for